as you know, we had a KC yesterday contact us and say there is some development work underway by an advisory group to the New Zealand Law Commission. And it is looking at possible changes to the now Conveyancing and Law Practitioners Act, I think it was, the statute that governs the practice of law. And the understanding as given to us was that there will be a change to the law so that in practicing the law, lawyers must take account of the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. And because this is still an idea, we don't know what the wording might be. It might be, be in compliance with or be consistent with the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. The problem is a lot of people can't find the principles written down or carved in stone anywhere. We think this is interesting. Also, the lawyer we talked to yesterday pointed out that one of the people on the so-called independent review was actually an author of He Puapua, and I guess was implying quite clearly this person there was for some sort of Maori radical, and we can't have them, can we? So, interesting story, and we thought we would develop it. So we went to the Law Society and said, we'd love to interview you on this. And, the Law Society represents people who are, I think, probably very skilled in putting their views and explaining people to think and being convincing. In fact, sophists is what lawyers are sometimes described as, or barristers. But here's what they said, and this is the Law Society. They represent all those lawyers in the country, and they start it friendly enough, the Law Society, don't they? They say, hey, Ben. Unfortunately, no one is available to come onto Sean's program tomorrow. However, we have prepared a statement that Sean can read out, thanks for that, to clear up Mr. Judd's incorrect, this is the KC we had on yesterday, incorrect assertions regarding the independent review panels, not the New Zealand Law Society's report and recommendation. Now, they're dancing on the head of a pin there already, aren't they? They commissioned the independent review panel under their auspices, so it's their independent review panel, no matter how they want to slice and dice it. It didn't just pop up out of nowhere, New Zealand Law Society. It's your review panel. You cannot distance yourself from it, even by saying it's independent. And here's a quote. The independent review recommendations are theirs to speak to. Oh, so we're going to need to try and get them, even though they'll say talk to the Law Society. Let's try and get them today, Ben, but they'll say talk to the Law Society. The Law Society is currently consulting on their recommendations with the profession, and no decisions have been made. A response to the recommendations will be provided to the Minister of Justice by the end of the parliamentary term. It is important to note that the recommendation regarding a new statutory provision relating to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi relates to the functions of the regulator and not lawyers themselves. So it's for the Law Society to have regard to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, whatever they are. The majority of independent review panel did not support including a reference to New Zealand's constitution and to treaty as part of a lawyer's fundamental obligation to uphold the rule of law. That's right, and there are two issues here. If you do want to speak to someone, I recommend contacting the independent review panel themselves, since it's their report. So, shall we try and contact them today, Ben? Let's see how we go. We'll make this a bit of a saga. So we'll try and get the independent legal review panel commissioned by the Law Commission to contact us. And that was from Liam Kernigan. And Liam, who could have come on the program and said that all himself and stopped me patronising him, he's the Public Relations and Communications Business Partner at the New Zealand Law Society. But Liam isn't paid enough to come on the radio and speak live, or the platform and speak live. We're not radio. We're media. So there we go. There is where things stand at right now. And is this important? Is Mr. Judd QC stirring up a hornet's nest where none exists? What are the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, and why does it have to be recognised anywhere? We are joined now by a man who should know all about this, a former minister in the national government, a well-qualified lawyer himself, a man who's negotiated difficult treaty negotiations in his time as the Minister for Treaty Negotiations and now, I think, an acerbic and very good commentator on what is happening in the country today. Mr. Chris Finlayson joins us. Chris, nice to have you back on the platform.
I'm not acerbic, I'm warm and gentle.
And acerbic. You can be all those things. Chris, first, what are we talking about here? A fundamental change to the law regarding lawyers or not?
Well, a couple of points. It's not good enough for Kernahan simply to refer you to the review committee, because the review committee would then bounce you off by simply saying, oh, we've done our job, we're functus, we're finished, so go to the Law Society. So it's just a game of tennis, which is hopeless.
Yeah.
The second point I would make is that I get concerned when people start saying they're bound by the principles of the treaty or have obligations under the treaty when they are not governmental organisations. The treaty was signed by the Crown and the great rangatira of the various iwi, and there's just this increasing trend in this country for private organisations, non-Crown organisations, to say that they have treaty obligations. They don't. And let me give you an example. In my parish, the Cardinal foolishly closed the St Benedict's Church in Kandala, and someone from the parish council told me, oh, well, in accordance with the principles of the treaty and our obligations under the treaty, we've got to we'll probably be offering the land to the local iwi first before we put it on the market. But that's just garbage. Absolute rubbish. And so then the next point that you make, which is a very important one, is that the current 2006 Act, and I know it well because Gough was the Minister of Justice, I was in opposition, and Parliament spent a lot of time on it and came up with a pretty good model. The current regime talks about the responsibility of lawyers to uphold the rule of law and facilitate the administration of justice, improving access to justice, promoting and protecting the interests of consumers. That all makes a lot of sense. But how...
In broad terms, it says you must act in the interest of your clients and justice, Chris, which seems a reasonable expectation.
You'd expect that. But then you've got this clause that the review committee came up with: all persons exercising powers and performing functions and duties under this act must give effect to the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Well, there are two issues there. One, the first point I made, and secondly, what does that mean in a practical sense? When I was a minister reviewing legislation, I always avoided formulaic reference to the principles of the treaty and used to descend to some detail what that actually meant. So I regard that as a lazy, woke suggestion that doesn't descend to any detail and doesn't provide any guidance for those who read the report and want to make some changes. So it's a very, very poor substandard effort by the review committee.
And therefore the Law Commission, the Law Society.
Well, the Law Society's received the report. I've actually got a modicum of hope for the Law Society because they have a good president now who's better than some of the disasters they've had in recent years. And so hopefully he'll bring a bit of good Otago common sense to it and nut something out that's workable. But the review committee has come up with a suggestion, and any half-sentient Law Society will say, well, that won't fly without a lot of work.
Mm. You've said some interesting stuff today already, and I've been listening hard. But the first thing I just want to clarify, you say obligations under the treaty do not exist for anyone who didn't sign it.
Well, I'm saying the treaty was signed between the Crown and the iwi. It wasn't signed by private organisations.
Okay, so no business has obligations under the treaty?
No, and it's foolish for people to assume responsibilities when they don't exist. It is, of course, people have to and the Law Society or any private organisation conducting business should be aware of what the treaty means and try and conduct themselves toward Maori in a positive and generous kind of way, but they're not treaty obligations.
No. Well, what about, and I just want to give you an example from my own industry. Those who receive the Public Interest Journalism Fund, those who receive any sort of government funding for their journalism, are required when they take that money to give effect to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. Even if they're private organisations, they are co-opted into that obligation.
Well, I find that quite extraordinary, and mind you, I'm not responsible for the administration of the Public Media Fund, which basically turns
the Public Interest
journalists. Yeah, it turns journalists into sort of, like in the old Soviet days, journalists for Pravda.
Yeah. Do you think, overall, getting back to the legal issue, the lawyer issue, is there a need to recognise specifically the Treaty of Waitangi in the regulatory and legislative framework we have that administers those who work in the legal profession in New Zealand, lawyers?
Well, no, I think that the Lawyers and Conveyances Act 2006 spells out what are the fundamental obligations of lawyers, and I think they got it right. And trying to tack on some of this other stuff is neither necessary nor is it wise, but we'll just see how the Law Society deals with it. And hopefully, I frankly think the 2006 Act is pretty good. It received a lot of attention in Parliament in 2006, and it's looking at Parliament, not party, did a pretty good job with it, and so doesn't need this fundamental change that these reviewers have come up with.
And Chris, and the Law Society has no obligations under the Treaty of Waitangi to the so-called principles of the treaty?
I don't think it has, and I think it would be foolish to start saying that they're bound by the treaty and that they have to observe the principles. But I come back to the drafting point as well. What principles are we talking about? What does it mean?
Well, that's where I wanted to end up.
Real terms.
Yeah, that's what I end up, Chris. If I had $1 for every one time someone had told me about the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi and how the platform, for example, is constantly in breach of them, I'd be a rich man, much richer than running the platform. Many people,
I drafted.
Many people say to me, "What are the principles of the treaty? Could someone show me where they're written down?" Do we need to do that, or are they some amorphous thing that can mean all things to all people?
Well, I just think it's a matter of drafting. When I was Minister of Culture and Heritage, I redid the historic places legislation, and I put in a specific treaty clause which I think made the officials sit down and say, well, what exactly are we talking about when we say, in order to give effect to the principles of the treaty, we mean this, 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 and this, and it's all spelt out. But I think if we have lazy drafting that shall recognise or give effect to or take into account the principles of the treaty, it's just bad drafting, Sean, and you sow the seeds for litigation and judges deciding these things on the hoof. It's not really satisfactory, and I would have thought, as a matter of legal drafting, you've got to really start descending to some detail.
All right. Do you think Mr. Judd QC was right to raise this issue on the platform and write his column about it? Is it a genuine concern?
Oh, Gary's a very senior person, and diversity of views is actually a very healthy thing in the Law Society. Why should we be straitjacketed into giving particular views or having particular views? And so Gary's entitled to his view, I'm entitled to mine, and we'll just see where the Law Society ends up. But I end as I began. It's no good Kernahan from the Law Society saying, oh, well, look, refer to the reviewers, because their job is done. Their report is completed.
And it was so commissioned by the Law Society. At the end of the day, the buck stops with them.
Well, we'll have a bit of a debate within the profession and see where we get to, but I hope that when it comes, if the legislation's to be redrafted, then reference to a formulaic clause like that as a matter of law is a very bad practice, and I have lots of experience in how to draft treaty clauses, but they won't come to me because I'm old and white and male.
Good on you, Chris. Hey, always a pleasure, my friend. Take it easy. Thank you for your time this morning.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Chris Finlayson there, the former Minister of Treaty Negotiations, a lawyer himself. So, Liam Kernaghan, I'm sure you were listening to that, Liam Kernaghan. Why don't give us a ring, mate, and just give us an interview and stop with the duck shoving. But isn't that an interesting perspective that you might want to comment or ring in on? No one but the Crown has any obligations under the Treaty of Waitangi. You are free. You are free of obligation to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi unless you are the Crown, which most of us aren't. Private businesses aren't. The Bowls Club isn't obliged under the treaty, right? McDonald's isn't obliged. No private business is obliged. No sporting organisation is obliged under the treaty. You have no treaty obligations unless you are the government. Isn't that liberating this morning? I feel don't you, Ben? I feel a great weight lifted from my shoulders, knowing now that I do not have the white man's burden to carry any longer.